Hello, this is Lawrence Houlgate, the author of Understanding John Locke, the Smart Student's Guide to Locke's Second Treatise of Government. We are in Chapter 6, and if you'll recall, we talked about paternal power in the last session. This is Episode 11. We're going to talk about conjugal society in the state of nature. Locke begins the chapter with the remark that the first society in the state of nature, quote, was between man and wife, which gave beginning to parents and children. And that's in paragraph 77. Locke uses the word family to refer to a social group, and he writes that servants would be part of this first society. He also writes that the masters and mistresses of the servants and children would have some sort of rule proper to a family, although he does not tell his readers about the origin of this rule. Let me say as a side remark that in the 17th century, a family included everyone residing in the same house, including the domestic servants. For example, to illustrate his scheme for a public granary, the applicant imagined a family of 7 persons with these words. Here's what he said on his application. The self, wife, a man, a maid, and 3 children. That was his family. Himself, his wife, a man, a maid, and 3 children. In this quote, the self is the husband, and the man and the maid are the servants. Servants were commonly given the same status as wives and children, and all of them were subservient members of the family. So going back to the book, the first society is what Locke calls a conjugal society. The term conjugal refers to the sexual relationship, of course, between a man and a woman. It is a relationship that is, quote, made by voluntary compact or contract between man and woman. This implies that a conjugal society could not be created if one of the partners was forced into the relationship. Consent is a necessary condition of a conjugal society. Although Locke uses the words husband and wife when referring to the 2 partners in conjugal society, he does not use the word marriage until a later paragraph when he writes about the ends of marriage, quote, being obtained under public government. The implication of this is that Locke does not want the reader to confuse conjugal society with legal marriage. There may be aspects of legal marriage regulated by government that are not required for a conjugal society. For example, marriage laws might prohibit marriages between persons younger than 16, and marriages between brothers and sisters and between first cousins. Locke makes no mention of these requirements in his discussion of conjugal society. Now, in the state of nature, there are, by definition, no man-made laws defining and regulating conjugal society. There's only the natural law. And yet the first and second versions of the natural law that we've already talked about back in Chapter 2 says nothing about conjugal society. There are no rules telling people in the state of nature about the rights and duties that one has or assumes when entering a conjugal relationship. Who they can marry, how many persons they can be married to at one time, or even how old they must be to marry. Locke writes that some of the terms of the voluntary conjugal contract are set by natural law, not by the conjugating couple. The main purpose of conjugal society is, as Locke puts it, such a communion in right in one another's bodies as is necessary to its chief end, procreation. Notice that the right to another person's body has been created by the contract that created the conjugal society. No mention is made of sexual pleasure as the chief end of conjugal society, no doubt because this would promote far more communion in one another's bodies than is necessary for procreation, a consequence that would probably not be approved by the puritanical culture of the 17th century in England. The other purpose or end of conjugal society is the care and education of the children, resulting from their bodily communion. I mean the bodily communion of husband and wife, of course. Husband and wife must, quote, support and assist one another in these tasks. And natural law requires that the task of caring for the children must last until they can, as Locke puts it, shift for themselves. But Locke leaves it up to the husband and wife to make side agreements as part of their conjugal contract. He writes that, apart from the requirement of consistency with the chief ends of procreation and childbearing, all else can be varied and regulated by that contract which unites man and wife. That's paragraph 83, second treatise. These last words about private agreements make Locke appear much more liberal about marital relations than one would expect to see in the 17th century. Although Locke may not have had in mind prenuptial agreements about the division of post-divorce assets, this kind of agreement would certainly qualify as one of the ways that a conjugal contract can be, quote, varied and regulated. The liberal appearance of Locke's remarks about conjugal society is also validated by his suggestion that the conjugating couple might agree to separate or dissolve their contract after the children are grown and left home. Here's what he says in paragraph 81 of Second Treatise. Quote, "Why should this compact not be made determinable either by consent or at a certain time or upon other conditions, as well as any other voluntary compact, there being no necessity in the nature of the thing to the ends of it, that it should always be for life?" The phrase "in the nature of the thing" is importantly relevant. Locke makes it clear that he is discussing the natural law emphasis on voluntary agreements, not the positive law of England, which ordains all such contracts to be perpetual, that is, all such contracts of marriage. Locke was far ahead of his time when he wrote that he saw no reason why the conjugal contract should always be for life. However, any proposal to make divorce legal in 17th century England would have been strongly opposed. Traditional church law placed great emphasis on the sacredness of marriage and on its inseparability. Divorce in the modern sense of the word, that is, termination of a valid marriage with the possibility of remarrying, was simply not recognized. There has been criticism of Locke's position on the status of women in marriage. He's been accused of endorsing the unequal relationship of husband and wife that was so common in 17th century marriages. For example, Locke writes that although, quote, "the husband has no more power over the life of the wife than she has over him, in those cases where they disagree, the husband," he says, "shall have the last determination, that is the rule." Why? Because he is the abler and the stronger. Now, it's not clear what cases Locke has in mind, but spousal disagreement could be about sex, could be about money, the children's education, or any of a number of other matters about which married couples commonly argue and disagree. And that's where Locke runs into trouble with his critics. One person, man or woman, might be stronger or have different abilities than the other, but that doesn't justify giving that person the power or the right to make the final decision about where their child should go to school or how much money should be spent from the family budget on clothing, food, or shelter. If a husband and wife disagree about where their child should be homeschooled, it would be irrelevant for the husband to say, quote, "I have the right to make this decision because I am stronger than you and I know how to repair cars." Well, that's it. We end with even though John Locke is quite liberal with respect, especially with respect to divorce, which would have shocked most of his contemporaries, he does get into trouble when he talks about, at least he would get into trouble today, if he talks about the husband having the last determination or the rule. Why? Because he's abler and he's the abler and the stronger. There's just no logical connection between being able to change a tire and having power in the household, or being strong enough to change a tire and thereby being the ruler in the household. Well, that's all for today. Short session. We're going to continue in episode 12 with political or civil society. And this is where the bulk of the Locke's second treatise will lie. This is where you're going to see and hear about the extreme difference that John Locke made to political philosophy since the time of Plato. We'll see you then.